Greetings fellow painters, Trahane here. Today we paint Black Goat of the Woods with a cool OSL backlight effect using only a standard paintbrush. We will first paint the model in its entirety without any effects for those who enjoy a simpler paint scheme. And if you are here solely for the OSL tutorial, you can jump straight to it using the timestamp down below. I am going to spend a little more time describing each step of the process than I have in previous videos, so feel free to skip around. A standard matte black prime miniature will be the starting point for this project. Then we're going to grab some German Camo Black Brown by Vallejo and start applying it to every part of the model. And while this is going to be the primary shade color for all of the flesh areas, we're also applying it to any of the areas that are going to appear red. That way we don't have to start from a flat black primer when starting the red areas. This of course does mean that we are going to get up close and personal with his Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. This first coat of paint will be thinned down quite a bit with water to increase its translucency so that the deep recesses still appear quite dark in color. A second coat of the German Black Brown will be applied just to the fleshy areas. The paint here will be thinned just enough with water to get the paint to flow smoothly over the model. With this coat we'll begin adding shape and volume to the muscles and avoid applying any paint in the deep recesses and areas that we want to remain in shadow. A 50-50 mix of Uniform Gray by the Army Painter and Black Brown by Vallejo will be used as the midtone for the skin. At this point I'm taking into consideration the direction of the light source while applying paint to the model. I imagine that the light source is coming from the model's upper right side, so I cover more surface area of each feature of the model that is pointed in that direction. This also means that any features that are pointed downward and to the left will receive less coverage with this layer of paint and also receive less highlights later in the process. Pale Yellow by Monument Hobbies will be added to the 50-50 mix of Uniform Gray and Black Brown to begin the highlighting process. And now each brush stroke becomes important. Since more paint will be deposited at the end of each stroke, I make sure to draw each stroke towards the light, finishing the stroke at the point on the muscle that I want to be the brightest. The highlights on each muscle will also be drawn up to a point where they meet the muscle above. So for example, when highlighting the triceps or biceps, they will be highlighted all the way up to the point where they meet the deltoids, not necessarily just on the part of the muscle that sticks out the furthest. Each time we add more pale yellow to the mix, we will cover less surface area on the muscles. As each layer becomes lighter, we can also apply the paint with stippling motions and short strokes to add texture and build volume on each muscle. The final highlights will be added with just a few dots of pure pale yellow. Next we'll go back to our Black Brown and Uniform Gray mid-tone color thinned to a glazed consistency, meaning that it will be very watered down to the point where it just hints the surface that it's applied to. Almost all of the paint will be removed from the brush before applying it to the model, where we will smooth the transitions between the highlights and shaded areas. And since this color is darker than our highlights, we are naturally going to draw each stroke from the highlighted area towards the darker areas. And once we finish that, we'll go back and reestablish some of our finest highlights. With the skin complete, we're going to grab some Dark Flesh by Monument Hobbies and base coat all of the tentacles emanating from the black goat's head, groin, beard, and extremities. Once the base coating is complete, we're going to thin the dark flesh with water to a glazed consistency and apply it to the tentacles emanating from the lower body to make a gradual blend from the gray flesh to the red tentacles. The next step is to switch to Burnt Red by Monument Hobbies to start building the highlights. Because the tentacles are so textured, we're going to start with a rough dry brush across all the surfaces before switching to a smaller brush to intensify some of the highlights in the most raised areas. Next, we will add Pale Yellow to the Burnt Red to continue the highlighting process. This highlight color will be added mostly to the edges as well as a few key raised areas, mostly around the head and face. The Pale Yellow by Monument Hobbies will be added to every highlight color on this model, as well as added to the highlights on every other character in this set. This will add cohesion to the set and make it appear that all models are reacting to the same light source when on the board. When adding highlights to the tentacles, we're going to make large jumps in value. In other words, we're going to get very bright, very quick, and we're also going to cover a very small surface area. This is going to make the surface appear shiny or wet. And now we're going to have some fun. We're going to make a pin wash out of some old ass oil paint and some odorless mineral spirits. And don't stress if you don't feel like messing with this concoction. I'm going to show you how to make an acrylic pin wash in just a minute. I am basically living proof that this is idiot proof. I just heap in some white oil paint, drop in some odorless mineral spirits and give it a good shake. I then load the brush and just touch it to the pentagram that's etched in his abdomen. The low surface tension of the oil wash makes it flow like magic into the recesses of the pentagram. And if you do color outside the lines, it's easily cleaned up with a makeup sponge or a clean brush with a little bit of mineral spirits. And while that oil wash dries, we're going to use titanium white ink by Liquitex to base coat all of the eyes on the black goat's face, knees, and the 5 points of the pentagram. Our acrylic pin wash will be made with Crimson Ink by Dale Rowney and some airbrush flow improver. And while not quite as magical as the oil wash, the flow improver is a surfactant which will lower the surface tension of the paint, allowing it to flow nicely off the brush with a very light touch. The Crimson Ink will be used to paint all of the eyes as well, but without the flow improver added. And with that, you should have a pretty decent looking miniature that's ready for the table with some dynamic lighting as you look across the miniature with some high highlights on the right side and some deep shadows on the left. However, there are a few more things we can do to take this model to the next level. We're going to go back to our Crimson Ink by Dale Rowney and use that as a foundation for our OSL. I want the light to appear that it's coming from the back bottom left of the miniature. When applying OSL with a standard brush, we have to take special care to note which parts of the model are going to catch the light, such as the lower shoulder blades, as well as the glutes, the tentacles emanating from the lower body and hands, the underside of the chest and rib muscles, and the underside of the shoulder muscles and triceps and biceps. The Crimson Ink is thinned with water to a glaze consistency, and most of the paint is removed from the brush so it doesn't pool in the recesses. I will start at a point on each muscle furthest from where I imagine the light source to be and draw the stroke towards the light source. The red will be most intense at the end of the stroke, so we want to finish each stroke at a point on the muscle that would catch the most light. This is not the easiest method for creating OSL, but I'm very pleased with how fast and smooth this went. I completed each area in just 2 coats, with the second coat of red applied only to the areas that I wanted to appear more intense. I continued this process over the back, lower body, and decided to add some to the horns as well, before moving on to the orange paint. I prefer using Clear Orange by Vallejo for my orange OSL because of how translucent it is. It too will be thinned to a glaze consistency. I always like to test my glazes on the back of my hand before applying the glaze to the model to make sure that there isn't too much paint left on the brush. The orange will be applied to the same areas and in the same manner as the red. Each stroke will be drawn towards the light source, however it will cover less surface area than the red. It too will be applied in 2 thin layers to intensify the glow. The final step of the OSL process is to add Pale Yellow by Monument Hobbies to the clear orange and highlight just the smallest part of each muscle that would catch the most light. The OSL that we're adding to the model is theoretically a reaction to a nearby light source, such as a campfire, a shimmering pool of water, or a glowing orb. Therefore, it's okay that the OSL on this model differs from the OSL of other models in the set. As a finishing touch, we'll use Muted Violet ink by Liquitex to darken the shadow areas, mostly on the right side of the Mini. This will add some depth and interest to the model. And I know that I said that this is not the easiest way to get orange OSL. If you would like to see an easier way to get this exact same orange glow on your models, please check out my Incredible Hulk video here, or continue painting your Cthulhu Death May Die miniatures with this playlist. Thank you so much for watching this orange OSL tutorial while painting the Black Goat of the Woods for Cthulhu Death May Die.